I will now call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 93 of the Standing Committee on Official Languages of the House of Commons, pursuant to Standing Order 1083, and the motion adopted by the committee on September 2023. As you would remember, the committee is resuming its study on federal funding for minority language post-secondary institutions. Well, I will just skip through some of the reminders because we've been holding these kinds of meetings for the past 2 or 3 years, but I just would like to underline for Mr. Cormier, who is virtually joining us, please wait to be recognized before taking the floor and turning on your microphone, and remain on mute until that time. I would like to now welcome from l'Association des collèges et de l'Université de la Francophonie canadienne, Mr. Martin Normand, who is the Director for Strategic Research and International Relations, who is here with us in the room. And from the University of Moncton, from the great University of Moncton, we have Mr. Gabriel Cormier, who is the Vice President in charge of Administration and Human Resources, joining us by video conference. So, Mr. Normand, you are accustomed to this. Mr. Cormier, this might be your first time. But so our witnesses will have 5 minutes for their presentations. I'm really strict with the timing because that way we will be able to get 2 full rounds of questions in. So we are going to go ahead and start with Mr. Normand. You have the floor for 5 minutes sharp. Go ahead. Thank you. In the new Official Languages Act, the federal government assumes a responsibility to act to ensure the presence of strong post-secondary institutions in Francophone minority communities across the country. The preamble to the Official Languages Act now recalls that the federal government is committed to enhancing the vitality of the French linguistic minority and supporting and assisting its development. This commitment is reiterated in the new subsection 41.1. It also recognizes the importance of protecting and promoting the presence of strong institutions that serve these minorities. In this respect, it is also important to recall the new subsection 41.3 of the Act, in which the federal government is committed to enhancing opportunities for French-speaking minorities to receive quality learning in their own language throughout their lives, including from early childhood through to post-secondary education. Subsection 41.6 even specifies that education is one of the essential sectors for the development of French-speaking minorities. These commitments echo concerns shared by various stakeholders, notably during the État généraux sur le postsecondaire en contexte francophone minoritaire that we organized in partnership with the Fédération des communautés francophones et acadiennes du Canada. On the one hand, the precarious state of the francophone post-secondary sector is a concern for the francophone minority communities who must rely on strong and agile institutions. And on the other hand, post-secondary institutions are looking to increase the range of their programs and services to local and international clients. For this reason, we urgently need to clarify the federal government's commitments. Our first recommendation is as follows: that the Treasury Board Secretariat accelerate the production of the future regulations under Part 7 of the Official Languages Act in order to provide clear indications of the federal government's new obligations, and to specify the role of the government is assuming with regards to the post-secondary sector in a minority francophone context. These indications will help define the federal government's ability to act in the post-secondary sector, including in terms of funding. Post-secondary institutions need ongoing support to ensure their long-term development as strong institutions that serve Francophone minority communities. The funding announced in the Action Plan for Official Languages 2023-2028 in support of the post-secondary sector is welcome, and it will help address the underfunding of minority language post-secondary institutions, as the federal government refers to in the plan. But these amounts fall short of what was expected, and as the federal government also states in the plan, efforts to further support the sector over the long term are required. In this context, our second recommendation is the following: that the federal government create a permanent fund of $80 million per year to support post-secondary institutions and official language minority communities. This funding was promised by the Liberal Party of Canada during the 2021 election campaign, but has yet to materialize. Canada's major political parties also pledged support for the post-secondary sector during the election campaign. A permanent program of this kind would send a clear signal of the federal government's intention to play its part in sustaining post-secondary institutions while respecting provincial jurisdictions. To this end, it has become clear that the greater cooperation between post-secondary stakeholders is needed. But existing federal, provincial, territorial cooperation mechanisms on education and the Francophonie have neither the mandate nor the interest to address post-secondary issues. We therefore propose a third recommendation, that the federal government support the creation of a consultation structure bringing together representatives of Canadian heritage and other federal departments, provincial and territorial governments responsible for post-secondary education, post-secondary institutions in a Francophone minority context, and other stakeholders in the sector. This concerted effort will raise awareness of Francophone post-secondary issues, and it will also enable us to better coordinate post-secondary support initiatives between the various levels of government while respecting each other's areas of jurisdiction. Clear guidelines for the implementation of the Official Languages Act, global funding, and intergovernmental cooperation will help to consolidate the institutions and to make them more agile and responsive so that they are better able to recruit and retain Francophone customers internationally and locally. A whole range of additional measures could be devised in collaboration and consultation once all these pieces are in place. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Normand. Within your time, and even before the end of your time, to our second witness now, I'd like to welcome you, Mr. Cormier. We are from the same school, from the University of Moncton. You will have the floor for the next 5 minutes. Thank you very much for your invitation. Good morning, everyone. So I will provide you with a context about the University of Moncton, which is the largest French language university outside Quebec, with its head office in Moncton and campuses in Edmundston and Shippagan, New Brunswick. We have just over 5,300 full-time students, and 35% of this number are international students. We are the only French language university in New Brunswick. And our mission is to offer university training in a wide variety of fields, including drama, nursing, engineering, and French common law, among others. We offer 135 undergraduate programs, 46 graduate programs, and 8 doctoral programs. We also offer training in French as a second language, summer immersion camps for high school students, and a wide range of training programs in French and English. As New Brunswick's only French language university, our mission, rather, is to provide access to post-secondary education in French for its Acadian population and for the Canadian and international Francophonie. Therefore, access to post-secondary education in French is a very important element in ensuring the survival of the French language in minority communities. The university generalist mission creates significant financial challenges. We have many programs with a low level of enrollment. Annual funding received by Canadian Heritage through the Official Languages in Education program is approximately $4.9 million, and this amount has not changed since 2002. In 2002, this amount represented 5.5% or so of the university's revenues, whereas now it is 2.5%. With the increase in salaries and expenses since 2002, we are having to absorb more and more costs, and we are having to reduce our range of services and scholarships. So stable, predictable funding is very, very important for the university. And to maintain the level of service as we had in 2002, it is very important that the amounts we receive be indexed. Using annual inflation since 2002, the $4.9 million in funding obtained at that time represents approximately $7.9 million in 2024, so we have a shortfall of about $3 million. We also receive an annual grant of $2.6 million from the consortium, the National Health Training Consortium. And this funding has also been stable since 2009, has just been increased by $250,000 starting next year. We received a major grant of $18.5 million over 3 years to stabilize and strengthen our capacity. This is an important amount, and it has enabled the university to make investments in modernization that it was unable to make in the past due to a lack of funding. We also have been able to secure special grants for complementary projects, such as updating our community halls, developing specializations in our programs, or modernizing our classrooms, etc. Our priority is to offer French language training to the entire population. Most of our graduates are able to work in both of official languages of the country, and we have the best post-graduation retention rate in New Brunswick for both Canadian and international graduates. Access to post-secondary training in French increases the likelihood that students will work in French, and of course, it's the same for the survival of our language. We collaborate with other institutions such as Université Sainte-Anne, where faculty development training is shared. Federal investments enable us to maintain competitive tuition fees while offering a high-quality training, but the funding should be indexed. And special programs, of course, are much appreciated, but stable, predictable core funding over several years makes financial planning much easier. Another major challenge is our infrastructure. Deferred maintenance at the University of Moncton amounts to $186.5 million over the next 10 years, which is almost equivalent to our annual operating budget. Most of the university's buildings were constructed in the 60s and the 70s, and we are now entering into a major renovation cycle. We, of course, need to take advantage of these renovations to improve the energy efficiency of our buildings and enhance climate resilience, and that requires, of course, a lot of investment. So in short, stable funding really is the thing that will improve our financial planning, but it has to be indexed because it hasn't gone up since 2002, and there are, of course, infrastructure needs that are becoming increasingly important for the University of Moncton. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cormier. We are now going to start the first round of questions. This will be an interactive Q&A session, 6 minutes for each of the political parties. And dear colleagues, if you want to use your timer on your phones, you can do that as well, because I'm going to be very strict to have 2 full rounds. So we will start with our first vice chair of this standing committee, Mr. Joël Godin from the Conservatives. You have the floor. Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank our witnesses, Mr. Cormier and Mr. Normand. On this Thursday morning at 8:15, you seem to be people who wake up early. So I'll start with Mr. Normand. I think yesterday, when you referred to the regulations, well, we rather found out that the Minister of Official Languages was announcing that this was going to happen in the next 18 months. The President of the Treasury Board also let us know that it will take 3.5 years, because if you add 18 months to the year we've lost since Royal Assent, then we're looking at the horizon of 2.5 years. So do you hope to see in the regulations any additional gains for your institutions, and which ones, if you want?
Yes, and thank you for your question. We have a lot of expectations with respect to this. We're hoping that there will be certain amendments to the bill as it was adopted, which finally were not inserted into the Act. So we're hoping that the regulations will specify some of these government obligations. For us, the interaction between federal and provincial jurisdiction for official languages is not specified adequately, the result being that when the federal government announces that it's going to take action in areas that are under provincial jurisdiction, it says later on in the Act that the precedence is given to provincial governments when it comes to Official Languages Act implementation. We know that post-secondary education comes under provincial jurisdiction, but in the Act it says specifically that this is a key sector that must be shared. So the regulation has to enable us to explain how the federal government is going to be able to take action in matters under provincial jurisdiction without any conflict. What exactly is the federal responsibility? In this process that was carried out by the Treasury Board to develop these regulations, were you consulted? We haven't been consulted. Yes? No, I don't think that this has begun, at least not with the groups. But we hope that when the consultations take place, that we'll be included. We will be there. And what I'm hearing indirectly is that the bill, which is now an Act, C-13, does not really meet the needs of your institutions. You don't feel that you have better tools to protect our French language, because let's be honest, French is the most vulnerable language here. I would nuance that. There are some interesting aspects. Post-secondary education is mentioned in official languages. That's interesting. But there are shortcomings that need to be dealt with through the Act. And this applies mainly to the post-secondary education. In your statement, you talked about the creation of structures that include the provincial level and other sectors. Do you think that we have other tools to allow us to take action, and that would be more effective? Don't you think that making this new structural change, that it will postpone or delay your ability to become more efficient? Quite the opposite. We think that we need a better structure right now, more so than ever. There are conflicts in interpretation, conflicts with respect to what the priorities are in the post-secondary education sector. With the envelopes announced by the federal government to support the post-secondary education, there are different processes that have been established in the province for their own post-secondary sector. So we have to have a space where we can work together to avoid these conflicts in terms of priorities. We want to avoid the situation where we have competing envelopes. Mr. Normand, you're at the end of the continuum in education. We know that there are two clienteles. There's those clients who come from our system here in Canada and immigration. Do you believe that we have enough Canadians who are interested in pursuing their education throughout the continuum of education in French to enable you to have enough clients, a big enough client base, because this generates money? Do you think that additional work needs to be done in that area? It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. We think that there is a good pool of Canadians who attend French schools, but the challenge is to retain these clients and to make institutions sufficiently attractive to ensure that the clients view this as being a good avenue to pursue. We want to make the post-secondary education in French attractive to Francophone clients. So we have to be able to offer the programs that young people are looking for. There are some programs that are not, for example, the STEM programs are very expensive to offer. So we have to support institutions so that they, in turn, can offer the programs that are in demand. Thank you very much, Mr. Normand. I apologize to Mr. Cormier. I had same questions I want to ask you about immigration. Now for the Liberals, Mr. Francis Drouin, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for appearing this morning. Mr. Normand, you're often before this committee. Maybe one day you'll be the commissioner. I'm interested in the whole issue of research and the Francophonie. In Quebec, there are researchers, but having even researchers, French researchers, tend to publish in English, and I'd like to know whether your members have access to funding for research, and if I may, maybe you could answer this question later, but could you provide us with some details which programs have access to this research funding? Thank you for your question. The whole issue of research and the publication or creation of French literature takes up a lot of space in the academic forum and internationally. French is losing steam in the area of research internationally. Last fall, I participated in the Francophone Week, which took place in Quebec, and we discussed this matter for a whole week. So all of the international Francophonie is concerned about this. The granting councils for research in Canada have programs that are better adapted for large research institutions that require a lot of infrastructure and have a long tradition of research. So for a smaller institution, it's difficult to be competitive. The researchers in our institutions have a problem competing there. And then when you look at the peer reviews that are done, it's usually done by English-speaking people. So there's a lot of work to correct this bias. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. I would invite you to read a report put out by the Research Council last week. This report deals with research in French, and the stakeholders are asking for more work to be done, but the government response to this report was very disappointing. The government more or less denied that there was a problem that was described by these stakeholders. So a lot has to be done to meet our concerns. In your opinion, when you talk about small institutions, those who want to pursue a PhD usually pick a well-known institution, but is there any place for smaller institutions, or do the smaller institutions collaborate amongst themselves to attract this type of clientele? For example, the institutions in the north, well, a lot of times young people leave the north and to pursue their studies. Perhaps is this conversation taking place amongst the institutions? Yes. This is a challenge. There are very few programs at the doctoral level in our institutions. The University of Moncton has some, but normally, generally speaking, this is rare. So yesterday, we had a strategic meeting to talk about collaborative projects amongst institutions at the postgraduate level to ensure that we can train and retain research leaders throughout the country. A few years ago, you are probably familiar with the debate on the funding of the French University in Ontario. I said that I was not in favor of the federal government funding solely the French University in Ontario because we need the federal government does transfer payments provincially and they invest in areas under their responsibility. But the money that's transferred, well, sometimes the money that's transferred that's supposed to be used for health, for instance, is used elsewhere. How can we assure that we dig? How can the federal government ensure? Well, we have provincial partners. You mentioned them. How can we ensure that the federal government has partners in the province to ensure that we have core funding, stable funding for our Francophone institutions? This provincial collaboration is necessary. We have to establish ties between the federal and provincial partners in post-secondary education. Certain funding structures go through education and not through the envelope for graduate education. So there's a tradition of collaboration that needs to be established. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Normand. And thank you for your contribution to research. I did my PhD in French, and thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Drouin. The Bloc Québécois, 6 minutes for the Vice Chair of the Committee. Mr. Beaulieu, the floor is yours. Thank you to our witnesses. First of all, a general observation with respect to post-secondary institutions in the French context. They've been suffering for years. You've talked about chronic underfunding. Do you agree with that? Oh, pardon me. I would like to know, if I understand correctly, the provincial governments outside of Quebec underfund Francophone universities, to be polite, and the federal government usually compensates through the official languages programs. Do you agree that there is chronic underfunding? What's the impact of that today? And is the federal compensation enough to offset the gap? I would answer by saying that the public funding in the university and college budgets has been reducing gradually over the past 15 years. So generally speaking, there is a decrease, explaining why our establishments are always looking for new sources of funding in order to be able to provide comparable services. In that context, you have to understand when the public funding decreases for universities, I've just found you have to, it's early, I know, you have to find a way to ensure that the Francophone establishments can provide comparable services to that of their English counterparts. So you say that there's less funding everywhere. So you can excuse them for not funding the Francophone institutions. No, we have Francophone schools have an additional mission. It's not always recognized in the government, the federal, provincial funding mechanism. I'm convinced that my colleague from the University of Moncton sees this on a daily basis, and he could testify to that better than I could. But we have additional duties that have to be recognized by this funding model. Thank you. One of the recommendations that's been put forward by your association is that it talks about funding. Is the federal government is refusing to comply with that? It's a little bit more complicated than that. Sometimes what happens, in order for our establishments to have access to federal funding, the provinces will ask the institution to use their own funds to compensate for the federal funding. So this doesn't always act as a lever where additional money comes in from the province. It adds to what the federal government is proposing. And what you have to understand, and this is why it's so important that we have a better cooperation. Sometimes the federal budget cycle doesn't tie into the provincial cycle. So if you're asking for additional money and doing the matching can be very difficult.
And in Quebec, for instance, the government of Quebec overfunds Anglophone universities compared to their demographic weight. But outside of Quebec, it's the opposite. Do you find that a little bizarre that the federal government in Quebec supports only Anglophone universities when it comes to official language programs? Well, I'll admit that I don't have the numbers before me, so I can't really tell what the situation is. So I will rely on your reading of the data. Well, it might also be the case in New Brunswick, and you mentioned this briefly. The funding structure for research coming from the federal government, and we're observing this in Quebec as well, based on the latest numbers, 30% of federal research funding goes to Anglophone universities, and this could also explain the differences between the different universities. They tend to favor the bigger universities. So how could we modify this to better fund Francophone universities outside of Quebec and also in Quebec to spread the funding in a more fair manner for maybe you'd like to comment on the part about outside of Quebec, but how can we do structural modifications? Well, I think we don't always necessarily have access to the entirety of the funding. We don't have big research labs, so that we have to mention and accept. As my colleague also mentioned, research is done in English for the most part, and it is hard to carry out our research in French. You're penalized if you publish an article in French, and it doesn't have the same impact, it doesn't have the same scope, so more and more English dominates. Thank you, Mr. Cormier. There will be more questions, but you've used up all of your time. So last round of 6 minutes, we are going to the representative of the New Democratic Party, Ms. Ashton. You have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to welcome our witnesses. As you know, the objective of this study is to come up with recommendations to the federal government. I think we heard it very clearly from Mr. Normand and Mr. Cormier that there is a need to fulfill the promise of $80 million per year, and that needs to be made permanent. That should be the stable core funding. So maybe I'll ask this question to Mr. Normand. Why is it so important to have these $80 million per year? Why is it so important to have this stable core financing? Thank you. I'll talk on behalf of the network, and my colleague can talk about his reality on his end. The report that we published a year and a half ago contains 30 or so recommendations about structural deficiencies that require collaboration between institutions, and you need funding for that to ensure the sustainability of different initiatives to overcome some of these challenges. There are also other structural challenges because our institutions are smaller and they don't have the same economies of scale as larger institutions. Therefore, it's always a bigger challenge for the smaller institutions. And we want to make the institutions more attractive, but at the same time, the needs and expectations of the students evolve. They want new services and programs, and that's how our institutions can become attractive. So we need to answer or meet the needs of both domestic and international customers and clients. Now, I'll ask the same question to Mr. Cormier, but Mr. Normand, within your network, within your members, what is the feeling? Because we're looking at $80 million per year funding. The promise has not turned into reality, and we're in 2024. So how do your members feel with this reality? Well, of course, it wouldn't be a surprise for you to hear that they are disappointed. In our report, we clearly underlined our expectations and needs, and we had a lot of hope when it comes to the new federal obligations for the funding as part of the legislation. So the steps that need to be taken will help with the aspirations of the communities and the institutions and fulfill the responsibilities of the lawmaker as well. Thank you very much. I'll also ask my first question to Mr. Cormier. Why is a stable core funding so important for your university? Well, that allows us to better plan our financial actions. Normally, we do this in cycles of 5 years, but we find ourselves in a situation where we don't have any certainty for the upcoming year. In 2002, $4.9 million, that was a good amount, but in 2024, $4.9 million means that I will need to hire fewer people, or a grant to a student in 2002 of a certain amount was a lot more important than what it represents now. So we have to make hard choices for our institution. So having stable financing that is also indexed, because costs go up, salaries go up. In New Brunswick, our electricity bill has gone up by 10%, for instance. So this long-term financing, funding, $80 million, will really help us a lot with our long-term planning and correctly, we will also be better able to make the necessary investments. Thank you very much. Now, my next question will be for Mr. Normand. You talked about supporting programs that are in high demand, and we need some of these programs. And we've heard from many witnesses before this committee that there's a labor shortage, especially in French language education and for immersion as well, French immersion. Should that be a priority for the federal government to support French language institutions so that more opportunities are created and more people, more teachers and trainers are formed that we will need in the future? Well, that's an interesting question, and that ties in with the question asked by the other member. Yes, it is part of the continuum, but we also have to look at the entirety of the continuum. We have to look at professors, TAs, or other professions that exist in the continuum, early childhood learning as well. We have to have a post-secondary sector that is sufficiently agile and attractive so that we can attract potential students who will then go on to fulfill some of these roles on this continuum. Mr. Cormier, do you have anything to add? Yes, but in 15 seconds, I don't know if I can. Well, you have 5 seconds remaining. I agree. It is very important in the education setting. Thank you, Mr. Cormier. Thank you, Ms. Ashton. I'm sorry, but this way we'll be able to get a second round of questions in, which we are now starting with Mr. Bernard Généreux for 5 minutes for the Conservatives. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. Mr. Normand, the structural elements that you referred to are no longer functional. But what are these exactly? Or how have we come to this point where we're facing these challenges with the overall structure? Well, when we talk about structure, in many institutions, in many sectors, in many parts of the post-secondary education world, the institutions have always had the means to react swiftly for financial, administrative, or political reasons to the demand that comes from the communities they serve for more programs. But the gap between the expectations and the institutions can get bigger, and over time, people look for very specific programs and they end up studying in English. So these gaps happen all along the continuum of education. So it is hard to react appropriately to this attrition if we cannot make institutions more attractive and allow them to adopt their program offering. Is it just a question of money? It is not just a question of money. What are some of the other elements that are not monetary in nature? Because you talked about a new committee, or in any case, a new structure to be created by the federal government to force the provinces so that they ensure a perfect education continuum. But if you set aside the question around money, what are the other elements? Because what we can face potentially down the road when we look at the finances, there are some things that need to be taken into account. Because we've heard over the last 8 years that we've solved all the programs and life is good and everyone is happy, but clearly that is not the case. That you're not happy. So you've talked about structural problems, and they have not really been dealt with. Money was provided, but other problems were not addressed. Well, if we want to become more efficient in the post-secondary sector, there needs to be better consultation between the different levels of government so that the interventions of each level will be as efficient as possible. For instance, we don't really have great collaboration between our institutions to offer a wider range of programs across the country. While provincial governments need to talk to each other so that different provinces collaborate. And the federal government can play a leadership role to make sure that these spaces exist and that these discussions between provincial governments happen and that different initiatives and the knowledge from the federal government can come into play and to assist our institutions so that they're as efficient as possible. Mr. Norman, I've been here for many years now, and we've heard a lot that the federal government provides funding to the provinces, but there is no accountability, and for the provincial money for education, I mean. But there is no accountability, and we don't know if this money was really spent by the provinces for education. So consultation, yes, I agree with that, but will it really help solve the problems? I have my doubts, but I would be ready to give that a go. But still, provinces need to believe that this could work. So I don't think it's just a money problem. And we have proof before us. It takes will from all of the stakeholders, and I don't think all of the provinces are equally as willing. Thank you, Mr. Généreux. Thank you for your comments. Thank you, Mr. Normand. We are now going to Mr. Daryl Samson for the next 5 minutes. Thank you. Well, I hope I can use all of my time. I have many questions. So I would really appreciate your support on that. Mr. Cormier, thank you very much for being with us today. The information you've shared with us, and of course, Mr. Normand shared a lot of information with us too, but I'm really troubled. There are good things. There are a bit more complicated aspects as well, but I will be asking for more information on certain points. So the first thing I told myself before coming here was, what do the provinces do? What's the relationship between post-secondary institutions and the provinces when it comes to the Francophonie, so that it's at least fair, if not equal? I used to be the general director of a school board in Nova Scotia, and I hammered the same point over and over again, that it needs to be fair, but not necessarily equal. So, Mr. Normand, so what are the provinces doing? What's the relationship with the federal government? What are their contributions? But this applies in other fields as well, that money is provided. They take this money and they use this money wherever they want or put it elsewhere. So all of the issues that my colleague mentioned.
A consortium, there has already been one. There was the National Roundtable on Education that worked very well. I participated in this roundtable, and it gave space for people of goodwill to work on this file. Mr. Cormier, do you think it's a good idea to have a consortium? Even I believe in it, but I'd like to hear from you. I think it's a good idea to have some type of consortium so we can discuss these issues together and ensure that the new act is implemented. Second point, I'm surprised. I've been since 2002 that you have had this reduction by 4.9 million. That's unacceptable for Francophones. Because it's totally unacceptable. From 2002, up till today. That's it for regardless of the government in power. That's unacceptable. So, question: I heard someone, and if I do research and I decide to do it in English because I'll reach a greater auditor. Does that mean I'm going to get more money? It's a joke. Did I understand what you were saying correctly? I can't really talk about research programs specifically, but your research reaches a wider audience if it's in English. So at the University of Moncton, I studied at the University of Moncton. How important, and I'm impressed. You need money because the province wasn't prepared to put forward money on its own. So I congratulate you on that. How do the students who study at Moncton University, do they remain in New Brunswick? Do they remain in the Atlantic region? Do they contribute to the economy of the region? Yes, we have the best retention rate of all of Atlantic Canada, especially for Francophones. They work in companies, and they make up for the shortfall in the workforce. So in the 30 seconds remaining, what effect has this shortfall in funding had on your programs for training in French? You have 30 seconds, and you have 20 seconds to respond. You have to make choices. So we can't offer all of the programs. We have to reduce the number of scholarships or give less to more people. So we have difficult choices to make. That's why you need additional money, and people in the provinces have to understand that fairness is not necessarily equal. Mr. Bull, you have 2 minutes and 30 seconds. You talked about consultation, collaboration, and to get arrangements between the federal and provincial governments. Do you feel that this structure will improve the situation? Do you think that a consultation strategy will really improve things for you? For instance, the official languages program in education programs is negotiated with CINIC, that's the Council of Education Ministers of Canada, and it's the Ministers of Education. Often our members have concerns that during these negotiations that post-secondary education is not on the agenda. In several provinces, the Minister of Education also wears different hats. So we need meetings that we have to make sure that the right people are at the table to negotiate these agreements, particularly those parts that concern the post-secondary education sector. And the other thing that I'd like to talk about, we talk about an education fund for those pursuing education in French. So it has to be sustainable and not on a piecemeal basis. What do you have to say about that? Do you feel that funding per project would be preferable to a fund to long-term funding? We need core funding that is long-term and stable. We also have complementary funding that helps us, but what we're looking for is we need to improve our core funding and be able to better plan, make choices as to what programs to offer. It takes time, to do this, but we need stable funding. Increase in funding will allow us to make better choices for the future. And you? In less than 15 seconds? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. Ms. Ashton, 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Thank you. Mr. Normand, the last time you were here, you explained how the new regulations with respect to international students could hurt Francophone communities and universities. You also recommended that Francophones studying in French outside of Quebec be considered a priority, particularly at the master's and doctoral level? Do you have any updates to provide us with? And do you have any other recommendations that you would like to make? On March 31st, 2024, all of the provinces implemented certification letters and divided up their allocations amongst the institutions. Most of the institutions are happy with the way that the distribution was made. But it's not normal that we have to count on luck and goodwill to ensure that post-secondary institutions have access to a certain number of, to an adequate number of letters of attestation. This uncertainty hurt our institutions. A lot of them fear that they won't have enough adequate enrollment compared to previous years. So during 3 months, the students could have decided to study elsewhere. And that includes Quebec as well, because Quebec had already a system in place, good for them. But a student who is uncertain and who wants to make a decision as to whether go to University of Montreal or in the University of Moncton will have, because of this uncertainty, go to Montreal. So this has had an impact on the number of applications made to the university. That's quite concerning. Mr. Cormier, can you share your experience since this announcement was made, and what recommendations do you have with respect to the situation of international students? I fully agree with my colleague. The fact that Quebec had already a system in place, I think that's going to penalize us in next year's budget. I think we're going to lose about 130 international students. That's $2 million over 4 years. So that's substantial for the University of Moncton because there was a lot of uncertainty that's created. We were wondering if there will get more students next week. The fact that Quebec already had a system in place, well, it was a source of concern for us. 30% of our students come from outside Canada, and they contribute to New Brunswick. So that's been a severe impact. We'll have another 3-minute round. So 3 minutes for Mr. Bernard Généraux and Mark Dalton, who will be sharing their time. I'll be brief, Mr. Normand. I would like us to have a summit, an education summit, a Francophone education summit. We've already done this in the past, so my recommendation is that we should initiate here in Canada a national meeting with all stakeholders as quickly as possible so we can deal with this issue once and for all. Thank you. Thank you to the witnesses. Mr. Normand, could you talk about foreign students and their importance in institutions, for one, funding, and for two, for the programs? Could you talk to us a bit about that? My colleague referred to the problem at University of Moncton and the loss of revenue and because of the caps that were established for this year. We're dealing with a smaller clientele, so we have to have more. We have to have international students. Yes, that means more revenue, but their seats, their bodies and seats that enable us to offer more programs. Without these students, perhaps there's a whole range of programs that our establishments or institutions would not be able to provide. These students have an impact on our communities as well. While they are studying, they have part-time jobs, and once they graduate, some of them actually stay. So it contributes to the whole ecosystem of the Francophone community. And the proportion of students who are international, what does that represent in total numbers? We calculate that for our network, for the 22 institutions under us, it's 12,000 students, which represents 30% of the total clientele of our 22 institutions. And the number of students who come from abroad, is it stable? Has it gone down? Are the numbers increasing? It's increased. It has increased over the past few years, but we haven't. Our institution have to play catch up because we didn't have a lot of international students for a long time. It's just been in the past 7 or 8 years. So enrollment is climbing. We're trying to catch up with our Anglophone universities. I have 6 seconds remaining, so I'll leave it there. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dalton. Mr. Serré, you have 3 minutes as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair. For my big 3 minutes, it's going to be tight, very serré. Thank you very much, Mr. Cormier, Mr. Noma. I have a lot of questions I'd like to ask you. But, Mr. Noma, could you send us here at the committee details about the structure, the model, letters of reference? Could you talk about your third recommendation pertaining to the structure? My question for Mr. Cormier, provincial responsibilities. It's very frustrating right now. We have some provinces, Ontario, when you look at UFO. If it weren't for the federal government, it just wouldn't exist. The federal government gave $1.9 million. The province put in no money whatsoever. In New Brunswick, could I understand the contributions that are made there? What's the responsibility and the role of the province in New Brunswick when it comes to French education? The funding model is very simple. You got so much last year, and you'll get an increase of X percent this year. As for special programs, there is a provincial contribution that's made for special programs when the province. So sometimes we don't get funding, additional funding for special projects for official languages because the province considers that that is something that should come from the federal government. So what would you ask the federal government to do to ensure that the provinces like New Brunswick assume their responsibilities? In my opinion, when there's a special project, the contribution should really come from the province because these are special projects, and you have to consider the generalist mission of the University of Moncton. There's additional costs involved when you try and provide a wide range of programs in French because training in French is extremely important. In 30 seconds, what should the federal government do to ensure that the provinces, Mr. Généreux, we talked about this earlier, what can we do to ensure that the provinces assume their responsibilities towards Francophone citizens? Mr. Cormier said this very clearly, but I would also say that the federal government has responsibilities as well. It has to really consider the new obligations in the Act. So that goes to Mr. Généreux's question and Mr. Sanson's question. Paolo, there is a protocol or a memorandum of understanding regarding education, and that includes provisions for transparency and accountability. Is that being done? Has it been implemented? Have these provisions been implemented with respect to accountability and transparency?
I will not ask for an oral answer right now, but if you can get back to us in writing, please, Mr. Norman and Mr. Cormier. So, again, are these provisions as part of the Memorandum of Understanding, are they used? And if they can be improved, how can we do that? And are they efficient? And a second question I'd like to see numbers for because you mentioned that it hasn't changed since 2002. So what has been the part of provincial investment in post-secondary institutions for Moncton, for instance, and how has it changed since 2002 until 2024, and has it kept up with the cost of living? Because it's their post-secondary institutions. We can, of course, talk about the federal government. Yes, we all understand that. But how have the provinces fulfilled or not their responsibilities vis-a-vis their own institutions? So if we can get the numbers, that could really be enlightening for us. And on that, Mr. Godin, just to add to your request, would it be possible that Mr. Normand provide us in his written submission a comparison between when it comes to foreign students since 2002 for each of the institutions? Is it really directly tied to the level of funding? I tend to think yes, but we can find out. Okay, on that, we're going to briefly suspend to transition into the second panel. Thank you to our witnesses. This has been really interesting. We've received some very good information, and we're hoping to get that written submission for that additional information. And now we are briefly suspended. So We will continue our session with the second part of our day, if you will. A very interesting subject, post-secondary education in the Francophone setting. So we have Mr. Jacques Fremont from the University of Ottawa, President and Vice Chancellor. Welcome. First time appearing before our Committee on Official Languages. And from the University of Regina, we have Emmanuel Aito, who's the Dean of the State Université Francophone. It's not your first time here, maybe in person your first time, but we've had you before the committee before. And then a faraway cousin of mine, probably from Collège Nordique Francophone, Mr. Patrick Arsenault, who is joining by video conference, who's the executive director. For those of you who don't know how things function here, I'm going to give you 5 minutes each for your presentations. If you can make it shorter, we'll have more time for the questions. So we are going to start with Mr. Fremont from the University of Ottawa. You have 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the invitation. I will be sharing some thoughts with you. You have a very important mandate, especially within the framework of this study for the financing of post-secondary institutions. Now, let me begin with 2 observations. The first is that post-secondary institutions serving official language minority communities are in a difficult, if not dire, financial situation. Second, for too long, our institutions have been caught between the federal and provincial governments who pass the buck, and you know this. We call on the federal government to fully assume its role as the defender of official languages and official language minority communities. Now, if you'll allow me, I'll also refer briefly to the situation of the University of Ottawa. We are the largest bilingual French-English university in the world. This year we welcomed more than 94,000 students to our campus, and of these, some 15,000 are enrolled in programs offered in French. So we're also very proud to offer the largest number of French university programs outside Quebec. In fact, over 80% of French-speaking university students in Ontario are enrolled at the University of Ottawa. So that tells you a lot about the impact we have in the province. We offer French language university programs in all fields in support of discrete and isolated Francophone communities, especially when it comes to medicine, health, law, social work, etc. And this also includes engineering, natural sciences, and more recently, pharmaceutical sciences. So it's a very significant spread of programs. But we are in a difficult financial situation due to the chronic underfunding of our Francophone mission. Last year, maybe you'll notice, the Ontario government set up an expert panel to examine the financial viability of post-secondary institutions. In its submission to the expert panel, we clearly demonstrated that for every Francophone student studying at the University of Ottawa, we receive approximately $3,000 less than a Francophone student studying at the province's other Francophone or bilingual post-secondary institutions. We have also demonstrated a shortfall of, in our Francophone mission at least, of over $50 million per year. In its report, the expert panel also echoed our chronic underfunding, but also that of Ontario's network of Francophone institutions. Subsequently, the Ontario government responded to all but one of the panel's recommendations. And guess which one that was? The one dealing with funding for Francophone and bilingual institutions in the province of Ontario. The province's solution seems simple. Fail to fund the Francophone post-secondary system to the level it needs and ask the federal government to take care of it. Once again, we find ourselves caught between the federal government and the Ontario government, and this was 4 months ago. So what's the role for the federal government then? Well, let me try to answer this question. For more than 25 years, despite politicians' rhetoric to the effect that the federal government cannot intervene in areas of provincial jurisdiction, the federal government has been investing directly in the post-secondary sector. For example, Health Canada has invested millions of dollars in our university to help us train the health professionals who will ensure access to a skilled workforce for Francophone minority communities across Canada. The Department of Justice is doing the same to train bilingual lawyers to provide Francophones with access to legal services in their own language. These direct interventions are undoubtedly justified and justifiable, in light of the federal government's core competencies, for instance, justice and health. But we believe that the federal government also has an equally important role to play in protecting the country's linguistic minorities. This Parliament recognized this when it modernized the Official Languages Act last year. The importance of the education continuum is now enshrined in the Act. In other words, parliamentarians have recognized that the federal government must fully assume its role in supporting official language minority communities. As with health and justice, there's nothing to prevent the federal government from providing direct financial support to their post-secondary institutions. As we know, the federal government doesn't always demand the same level of financial support from the provinces. It's the elephant in the room, Mr. Chair. Indeed, it often happens that the province actually forces us to pay the match on its behalf. The new federal initiatives are useful, laudable, and important, but so is the financial stability of our institutions, while chronic underfunding remains the norm. Thank you, Mr. Fremont. Thank you. You will be able to continue with your thoughts later on, but Mr. Aito, you will have the floor for the next 5 minutes. Go ahead, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The CITE is the connection between the University of Regina and the wider community, and since 2015, La Cité is the hub of university programming, research and services offered in French at the University of Regina and across the province. La Cité's mission is to meet the university educational needs of Saskatchewan francophones, regardless of their first language. Our goal is to provide diversified post-secondary education and research opportunities focused on francophone minority issues in an inclusive francophone environment with a focus on academic excellence. The CITE is part of a network of 22 post-secondary institutions offering French language training in a minority context, and we play a key role in our francophone communities. The 2022 report of the CFUAC and the FCFA meetings on post-secondary education in a minority context provide a solid foundation for understanding the issues, gaps, and realities related to post-secondary education in our country. We work with the Francophone community in Saskatchewan. We work with many community organizations, the school boards, and we try to maintain the culture and heritage in the province. We work with the History Society of Saskatchewan, and we created together an archive, and we are collecting qualitative, quantitative, and cartographical data from families, public organizations, and religious groups. And we also work with the youth organization to assess the impact of our activities and we try to identify and build language security among young Fransaskois. We offer various programs thanks to the financing of the federal government.
We offer master's programs, various certificate programs. We also have partnerships with other faculties where, for example, we have a bilingual BA in social work, which we have implemented an African and migrant center that benefits from new agreements struck with various universities in Africa. We have a collaborative BA as well. We are also grateful for the funding we received to renovate certain buildings. We have been able to improve our classrooms, test rooms, administrative space. These spaces have been made available to the Francophone community, which strengthens our relationships. We have now 12,000 users, students, and members of the community who use the service via La Rotonde in our spaces for conferences, workshops, programs, seminars, meetings, and so on and so forth. I must reiterate that the Francophone Cité Universitaire owes its existence to the partnership with the two levels of government. This enables us to equip ourselves to meet the needs of the Francophone community in Saskatchewan with respect to broadening access to post-secondary education in France. Although recent programs have been achieved thanks to the leadership of the University of Regina, we continue to deal with numerous challenges resulting from decades of underfunding, which have had a negative impact on Francophone communities. The lack of investment has resulted in less diverse programming. In addition to these challenges, we have other obstacles, such as a lack of promotion and the lack of recognition for post-secondary teaching in French. Still today, we have to fight against this myth that underestimates the benefits of having a post-secondary education in French. We are also dealing with shortfalls in terms of educational resources and student sources. You have 10 seconds remaining. You'll have the opportunity to say more during the questions. You'll have, to conclude, once again, I'd like to thank you for this consultation. On behalf of the Cité Universitaire, I would like to thank you for the investment and the support we get from the federal government over the past few years. And this has to continue. I repeat, this must continue. Now, Mr. Arsenault, you have 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Collège Nordique de Yellowknife, we thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is Patrick Arsenault. I'm the Director General of the College, and I'm speaking to you from the Chief Dry Geese Territory. Simply put, without the Collège Nordique, there would be no post-secondary and professional training in French north of the 60th parallel. Without federal government support, we would not be able to increase our ability to better serve Francophones who live here and those who come from afar. We play an active role in our community, and we are a college created for and by our community. Federal investments allow us to meet the need of our community and to build the confidence of students by pursuing post-secondary education in French. These investments are divided amongst two programs. We have complementary funding for post-secondary, and we have bilateral agreements. Despite our efforts, allophone immigrants and francophone immigrants in the three territories have no option to learn or perfect their French for immigration purposes. In 2023, Supreme Court ruled in favor of territorial parents who wanted to enroll their children in French language schools, and yet the parents don't have access to language courses in French, which seems to go counter the new official language action plan. With 11 official languages, we are one of 5 jurisdictions that have French as an official language. Thanks to our expertise in teaching languages and our commitment towards recreation, we have partnerships with the Indigenous nations in our region to teach from 2 to 9 official Aboriginal languages. Moreover, we have developed the first learning resource in French and English for newcomers. As for the post-secondary sector, federal funding is our only vehicle for developing it. In 2022-2023, we welcomed 645 students in our credited and non-credited courses. Aside from the figures, we have to look at the impact. One new teacher in childcare, for example, can create a service that didn't even exist beforehand. Every individual has an opportunity to have an impact. In 2018, we developed our first business multi-year plan without having any programs to show the rigor of our planning and the potential of the training of French in the Northwest Territories. We are happy that the federal government announced back in 2021 new complementary or additional funding for post-secondary education. Our plan was received, and we were able to take advantage of it. it was transformative. But there are three major challenges: precarity of the funding, the need to have territorial contribution to have access to federal funding, and the cost of running post-secondary education in French. We need direct funding, and we need to work in collaboration with the provinces so that our students can meet their aspirations. Thank you very much. We'll start with the first round of questioning. Every political party will have 6 minutes, and we'll begin with the first vice chair of the committee, Mr. Godin. The floor is yours. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for coming here this morning. I'm very happy to meet with the rector of the University of Ottawa, Mr. Frémont. I have a question for all three of you. It's an accidental question. The new Official Languages Act, how does it give you more tools to be more efficient? And my question is for all three of you. Perhaps, Mr. Frémont, you could begin. The new act says that we'll have more tools, but what's clear is if it's not matched by action, well, Mr. Miller made an announcement for foreign and Francophone students, but they set aside the consultative process. They didn't do this. They imposed this. They posed one form fits all for all of Canada, and clearly this was not a good move for the Francophone universities. Mr. Aeto, yes, we're impatiently waiting for action. It'll take 2.5 years. Thank you, Mr. Aeto. Mr. Arsenault, I agree with my colleagues. We're going to have to see the action and see multi-year, stable, predictable funding and indexed funding. Mr. Frémont, I have a question for you, a statistical question. In terms of funding at your university, 2022 versus 2024, what does that look like for Francophone students? I can't talk to you about 2022, but I can talk to you about the period between 2010 and now. We had a formula that we didn't understand. We had a deficit even when we compared ourselves to Laurentian University and Glendon College. A deficit of 4,000 in UFO. Well, I'm not going to answer that question. So it's a deficit. There's been no indexation, absolutely nothing. And with the increases of 3% a year, we've really been derailed. And when I talked about the $50 million deficit, this is money that we put on the table to ensure that services are offered and we were not compensated for them whatsoever. So now we're talking about $78 million. Mr. Frémont, you're saying that you're putting money on the table. Where are you getting this money from? From our general operating expenses. It's like a grant. So you're just shuffling the money around. Yes, that's right. So yes, this is having a negative effect on the institution. Well, the regulations I can talk about Ontario only, but tuition's been frozen for 4 years. This is a 5th year. The transfer payments have been frozen. So the tuition from foreign students is the only thing that kept us going. And so for the past 5 to 6 years, the tuition has been the number has been going up. So that's a solution for you. It wasn't only one possibility for a solution. It was the solution. well, since the announcement made by Minister Miller, we've had a real problem. Mr. Arsenault, you said earlier, up until now, you're given money to provide training to Anglophones, but you don't have money for Francophones. Did I understand you correctly? Francophones have to tell Francophones immigration that they have to take their course in English in order to pass the immigration test. I understand. In the official languages like this, isn't there a tool to protect you against that? We managed to, this year, we've got funding to develop the concept, but so maybe we'll be able to deal with it next year. We don't have any money to go further than that this year. So you're in desperate straits. The University of Ottawa and Regina, you are desperate. You want to be able to promote to your school in order to put an end to the decline of Francophone speaking, but the government doesn't give you the tools, so you don't necessarily have any tools right now, and you're hoping that this will happen for you in the future. We have money for maybe a year or two, but we've got a lot more we need to do. So you're putting your confidence in the federal government for this money, and in 18 months after the implementation of the act, you should be getting the money then. Thank you, Mr. Godin. You can ask your question at the next round. Now, Mr. Del Sampson, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you for your presentations. You've talked about possibilities for the future to resolve your issues. I want to say that I really appreciated the fact that Mr. Ito, that the federal government is investing in infrastructure and investments that have gone from $2.10 billion to today, we're talking about $4.2 billion, almost doubling. And that's not only for the universities, far from that. It's for early child care, tuition, which are working together closely with the various levels of government. And that's been successful. I'm very proud of that. Mr. Frémont, I'd like to thank you. You come from one of the biggest Francophone institutions. My uncle is a graduate from the medical faculty, so I congratulate for that. But I'd also like to congratulate a few years ago with the work that you did at the school boards in Francophone Ontario. There's a strong relationship that's been built, and that's the way we're going to achieve success. So I'd like to thank you for the work you did. You talked about a structure, a consortium that would, a national roundtable, if you like, in education for the post-secondary education sector. What do you think with respect to that? Mr. Frémont first.
It's not an easy question to answer. If it's just another forum to get together and chat, then I'm not so sure. Because there was a conference where everyone was invited and everyone expressed their opinion. Canadian Heritage is also aware. Everyone was informed. The provincial governments were there too. So, yes, we can have another round of discussions, but that's not the issue. The issue is one of funding. And not funding of new initiatives, but funding the intellectual infrastructure. Well, with all due respect, Because the concept of fairness and equality is key. The provinces do not understand this concept, not at all. So if we can have these people around the table, because there have been meetings, but if everyone is at the table, for instance, such as the case was at the National Roundtable, then we might achieve something. Yes, I mean we would be willing to participate, but you can also refer to a substantial equality in that case. Mr. Ato, I also made a presentation to your students a couple of years ago, although virtually. So if you could share your opinion with us, what do you think about the idea of a national roundtable for post-secondary education, not for other issues, but specifically that? I mean, if it leads to the implementation of concrete policies, then it would be a very good idea. Mr. Arsenault, for the Collège Nordique Francophone, we are participating in different fora actively, so we could do that as well. A central roundtable discussion would be useful. I apologize for having influenced the decision. That was not at all my intention. All this to say, and I think my colleague knows this, you shared something with us. You referred to research based on Francophone minorities. So do you have any comments on that idea? We set up a center that favors research in minority communities, and we subsidize the center out of the funding we get from the federal government that could otherwise go to support our own university. Mr. Fremont? Well, just to say that at the University of Ottawa, we have 12 research chairs on the Canadian Francophonie. These are entirely financed from the budget of the research center. So when we talk about large research funding institutions, we always face the same challenge, because if we ask for funding in French or for French research, that gets complicated. So more practical and pragmatic researchers make their requests in English. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Samson. Just a comment, just one last word. Because there was a memo produced by the FCFA. We should have that made available for the committee. Thank you, Chair, for your patience. Now, we go to the second vice chair of this committee, of the Standing Committee on Official Languages. I will need to leave. I will go table a report on Francophone immigration on behalf of the committee, and the first vice chair will be replacing me soon. But Mr. Beaulieu, you have the floor for 6 minutes for Bloc Québécois. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank our witnesses. Mr. Fremont, you referred to a study that compares the funding for Francophone students and Anglophone students. Could you give us a bit more detail on that? I can only speak on behalf of the University of Ottawa. We have our general subsidy, and then there are specific subsidies. This is money coming from the federal government taken by Ontario, and then the Ontario government of Ontario adds its own money to the pot, and that we receive as a specific subsidy. That is where we have $50 to $80 million that we are missing. That is the cost of us delivering the French language programs that we are currently delivering. Well, you know that there's a difference between what's happening in Quebec and outside of Quebec. In Quebec, Anglophone universities are overfunded, compared to their demographic weight by the government of Quebec and by the federal government, especially federal research funds. And there are many Francophone organizations outside of Quebec who ask for more accountability, that the funding and subsidies not be conditional on what the provinces are doing, because the situation is the opposite in other provinces where the provinces are providing less and less. So the government of Quebec will object to that because they want to have the flexibility on that issue. So do you think that an asymmetrical approach, generally speaking, could be applied, because that was partly the intention in C13? Could that improve things? Because universities outside of Quebec are asking for more accountability and less weight to be attributed to the response by the provincial governments. If you are familiar with the jurisprudence of the Supreme Court of Canada, the asymmetrical approach is completely acceptable and it is a valid method of doing things. And the Official Languages Act also adopts to a certain degree this asymmetrical approach, but it's not the same thing for minorities in Quebec or elsewhere in the country. But I don't think there should be any problem with adopting an asymmetrical approach. What I do not understand in your question is the relationship between transparency and the accountability aspect of things. We are looking at this from the outside, but if public money is being spent, then of course accountability and transparency should be required. While organizations are asking that federal money should not be conditional, as is the case in federal provincial agreements. In Quebec, that causes less of an issue because the provincial government is already overfunding its Anglophone universities. That was within that context. Okay, I understand now. Thank you. While on the other hand, federal research grants, well, on that side of things, there is underfunding for Francophone universities in post-secondary education and in French, and even the structure of the funding should be modified to be better adapted to smaller institutions. So I'd like to hear your comments on that, to all three witnesses. Thank you. Well, it's a real issue. Well, last year, 15 research-centered universities created close to $500 million in research funding. So it's big machinery. Therefore, that encourages the creation of bigger and bigger organizations and consortiums. Canada already has difficulties maintaining its international competitiveness. So if the trend continues, we will end up having problems in the quality of the science that's being produced, and that will lead to a loss of talent. The United States and Europe are quite aggressive, and every year we are bleeding out researchers because they are able to find a lot more money elsewhere. It's very sensitive, and I've been following Francophone institutions, and often they do research, but it's almost survival research. But if there's more collaboration, that would help. The same issue applies to smaller Francophone institutions that do not have access to this research pool. Our other witnesses, how should the financing structure be modified to encourage post-secondary Francophone research? Well, we at the STEF Francophone and other departments of the University of Regina, we are subject to the general framework on research of the university. Despite our efforts, in 15 seconds, please, Mr. Aito. We encourage our professors and researchers to work in French, so we are facing a lot of issues on that front, but it's the policy that needs to be adopted. Mr. Arsenault, unfortunately, Mr. Beaulieu, your time is up. And now we are going to give the floor to Ms. Ashton for 6 minutes. You have the floor, Ms. Ashton. Thank you very much. And I'd like to welcome our witnesses. As you know, the objective of this study is to come up with recommendations to the federal government. We heard in the first panel multiple times in witness testimony that a stable core funding is really needed. Would you have any recommendations or any priority recommendations for this committee as part of this study? Do you think that this should be the most important point? We could maybe start with Mr. Fremont and then go to the other witnesses. Thank you for your question. It's clear that it is a more important question for the Francophonie in Canada and for us at the University of Ottawa. There should be a way of holding the provinces accountable, increasing their responsibilities, and that everyone goes in the same direction. The infrastructure has a certain cost. Sustaining programs has a certain cost. And we have groups of 30 instead of groups of 60 or 65 in some of our French language programs. So it costs more to maintain these programs. Of course, I'm open to collaboration, but collaboration and new projects, as we talk more and more about at the federal government level, that requires labor and other things. I'll give an example. In pedagogical studies, for instance, we have 20 professionals who are supporting our programs in English and French. But if we want to collaborate with other institutions, then our professionals will also be relied on by these other institutions. So that creates additional burden. So it's not just out-of-pocket costs, but there are also infrastructure costs. And this infrastructure and this group of professionals should be supported. Thank you very much, Mr. Aito. Do you think that should be the most important recommendation in this study? Absolutely. A multi-year funding that is a lot more predictable and that allows for more stable planning should be the priority. And in a minority setting, of course, costs are higher. Okay. And Mr. Arsenault, on that point, please. For me, as my colleagues have underlined, that is the most important thing, ensuring multi-year stable financing, and there should be the mechanisms to allow the federal government to provide this financing, because in our territory we've been facing many obstacles and delays. Okay, thank you. Mr. Fremont, you started your introductory remarks by referring to the programs you offer at the University of Ottawa. On a personal note, in Manitoba, we have physicians who work in French. They've all studied at the University of Ottawa. So when you talk about the need to sustain sufficiently and predictably these programs with funding from the federal government, well, can you share with us the relationship between this core stable funding and then the services that are offered in French in my province, for instance, thanks to the programs you're offering?
In September, we started a pharmaceutical program to train first-line pharmacists who are going to work throughout Canada. There's no equivalent English training. The federal government provided money. That was great. Ontario was supposed to provide money, but they said, no, we're not giving any because you've already got your grant. But the money given, it was to get things going. However, it's a 4-year program. We're going to train generation after generation. So the money that was provided by the government, federal government at the start, is not enough to maintain this program. So in the business plan, we're caught. We were going to try and find the money elsewhere in the university, but we need stable funding, not just to get the program off the ground, but to enable the program to develop and to produce 100 or so pharmacists that can work throughout Canada. So this model has existed in medicine to train doctors who work throughout Canada. This funding is okay, but the needs have evolved over time, and the needs of the minority have evolved. They need training in French. Women have the right to give birth in French. So it's very important that we're able to support them, particularly in areas where we make a difference within the communities, the Francophone communities. And that's where there's a funding problem pertaining to the programs. We were able to get the pharmaceutical program off the ground, but it has to be able to survive in the mid and long term. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. How much time do I have left? 10 seconds. I'd like to just thank you for everything that you've shared with us. Thank you, Ms. Ashton. We will now begin our second round. It will be Ms. Stephanie Gouzi to take the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for sharing. I'll be sharing my time with Mr. Géraud from Quebec. Mr. Aito, I have two backs from the University of Regina, not from the Cité Universitaire, but my mother was from Quebec, but her family comes from the writing of the chair. Yes, they're real Acadians, but I have another connection. The Conservative Party and the Francois community, our leader, Pierre Poilievre, is a member of this community. So I have a connection with Saskatchewan because I have a parent from Saskatchewan and our leader is from Saskatchewan. Given that my father is a former student at the University of Regina, I would like to know more about your students at the Cité. How many students at your faculty are Franco-Saskois? We don't necessarily count our students in that way. The Cité serves all of the community, but we have at the Cité there are about 60 students who could be called as Franco-Saskois, but we have about 1,000 students at the students who from elsewhere. We work with other faculties. We have a bilingual option program. We work with the Faculty of Social Work. We have agreements with other faculties as well. So we offer courses in statistics, mathematics, etc. So our situation's a bit different from that of other institutions. So we say that it's an invention. That's why I talk about close collaboration between the University of Regina and the Franco-Saskois community. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Aito. Thank you, Stephanie. Mr. Fremont, is the University of Ottawa receives a grant? Yes. Right now, we're in a deficit situation. A big deficit? Yes. We're one of the Ontario universities with a sizable deficit. We're working hard to reduce this deficit, but in Ontario there are 12 to 18 universities recognized by the government that are in a deficit situation. You talked about the percentage of Francophone students that should generate more money. You talked about you should be getting $3,000 per student. We get about $3,000 per student. But it should be what? It should be, if we compare ourselves to others, it should be around $6,000. We have a problem. No one is able to explain the formula. Nobody can explain why we're in this situation. The government, the Wynne government, was aware of this situation but did nothing. Nothing's been done since then. We've tried. Sometimes we're able to balance our budget, sometimes not, and it's tiring. The general finances of the university in this shortfall, you said it was about $50 million. It's closer to $80 million now. Of this amount, what about the shortfalls in other programs, infrastructure, etc.? We have an operating budget over $900 million. Unfortunately, I have to interrupt you. I'm sorry, Mr. Généreux. I let you go on as long as I could. But if others want to ask a question on that same topic, they're welcome to do so. The floor is now is for Mr. Serret, and he will be sharing his time with Mr. Drouin. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for appearing here today. In terms of federal fundings, the $4.1 million modernizing the official language is the first time this has been done in 50 years. The SIF program, the infrastructure problem that Mr. Aito mentioned, and $25 million for the Laurentian University. As Mr. Fremont mentioned, money has gone from the federal government into health, medicine. Thank goodness there's federal money that's being put into these different sectors. This $9 million, that's 100% federal government, and thank you for the work that you did at the university in Sudbury. And there was money sent to Yellowknife as well. I do understand your frustration. I'm sorry, Mr. Serret, I have to interrupt. There is a vote in the House, so I would ask for unanimous consent to continue the meeting. Everyone is in agreement? Okay, I apologize, Mr. Serret. So I do understand your frustration. The underfunding from the university, from the provincial government in Ontario has been going on for years. And I understand the problems with international students. But your demands for today, you're saying the federal government should be responsible for certain sectors. How much money are we talking about? What is the shortfall? And I here refer to the University of Ottawa. And secondly, if we're the ones who are responsible, what would you say? What would you tell governments? What would you tell Quebec or Premier Smith, who's just passed legislation saying that the federal government has no business stepping into in provincial matters? Is there a law that says you can't get money? That says that you can't accept money from the federal government. It's clear that universities come under provincial jurisdiction, but what we're suggesting with respect to the Francophone initiative in Francophone establishments, when we need to, the federal government should be able to intervene when necessary. We have to stop being ashamed. We've had this problem in the history. The RCC recently said, well, the universities, this is something that comes under provincial jurisdiction. And we talked to the minister and we said, but how much money per year What are we talking about? For how many millions of dollars? And that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that the problems disinvest. I'm saying that the federal government be able to invest directly in minority institutions. But isn't it going to simply encourage Premier Ford to back away completely by having people of goodwill sitting at the table? I think we can do something. It's a challenge. There's always a way of coming up with a way where to convince the provinces that they have to live up to their responsibilities. Mr. Drouin, I remember a lot has changed since I went. There's been all kinds of construction going on in Ontario. It's Dalton McGuinty who made this political choice to invest in our institutions, and I don't know if I hear there are needs in infrastructure throughout Canada. Unfortunately, there are governments that just don't understand the responsibility of investing in our post-secondary institution, and this will have a major impact. And then artificial intelligence is coming along. So jobs are going to disappear. And Mr. Fremont, I support you 100%. And if we have to motivate the Franco-Ontarian community, let's do so throughout Canada even, and maybe that's what we have to do. Burnout, though. Burnout's a problem because people are always having to fight, but you're right. You have a few seconds left. Okay. The message was clear and heard. Mr. Beaulieu, you have 2 minutes and 30 seconds. A subject that we haven't touched on is the approach that universities have with respect to Francophones. In the past, we saw what happened with the UFO and other bilingual universities. What do you think? Let's be clear. I've been in this position for 8 years. I've never been against this university. This is a very legitimate movement in Ontario. It's necessary. Recently, we announced an agreement that we would be working with the University of Sudbury to share programs so that which is absolutely crucial in Ontario. We have to broaden the number of courses offered. In Windsor, there are needs in health, social work, justice, and we are starting to work with the University of Windsor so that it can offer a year in French to help professionals that are capable of working in French. What's essential is that the range of programs offered be broadened. And it's absolutely crucial. And those who say that we're what do you say to people who are saying you're favoring assimilation? We did an audit 2 years ago to find out whether that was the case, whether we were respecting the French Services Department in Ottawa, and 88% were without problem. There were some areas where students would have to take an English course in order to complete the program, but this has been rectified. We're talking about 250 programs that are offered entirely in French. The labs are in French, the profs speak French, and the other universities. Is that part of your demand as well, that it be by and for Francophones?
Absolutely. We rely on our collaboration with other institutions outside the province of Saskatchewan. So, yes, we agree with, in principle, with this proposal. Mr. Aito and Mr. Beaulieu, thank you. Now we are going to Ms. Ashton, and it will be the last speaker for this committee for today's meeting. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes. Thank you. We know that there is an affordability crisis in our country. Young people in Canada are faced with a very difficult economic reality, and it's getting harder by the day when we look at housing, groceries, and future career planning. And we also know that post-secondary education is getting more and more costly. Yes, this study focuses on the financing of post-secondary institutions, but we don't have institutions if we don't have students. So, what recommendations could you share with us? How can we face this affordability crisis that the students, young Canadians, young Francophones are facing? What can the federal government do to help them so that they can continue their studies in your institutions? And let's start with Mr. Fremont. Thank you. I think the key is funding. We should not lose students in the education continuum. When students decide to go to university in English, they will study in English and they will be removed, if you will, from their environment. So we can also talk about grants and immigrants who come to the country. They could be encouraged to attend Francophone institutions and be a part of Francophone communities. Mr. Aito? Scholarships and other types of financial assistance are important. In a minority setting, it is tough to provide support to our students, but it's needed. Mr. Arsenault, I know you are from the north. I come from the north as well. Ms. Ashton, 5 seconds. Do you have anything you can share with us on that? Mr. Arsenault, very quickly, if you can conclude, otherwise I will have to interrupt. When it comes to affordability, our students often leave for Ottawa, Toronto, or Montreal, and they end up spending significant amounts on housing and other items. Thank you, Mr. Arsenault. I'd like to thank our witnesses. And just a reminder, if you have additional information and documents you want to provide, I highly encourage you to do so. You can send all written information to our clerk, who will then share it with us. And I also take the opportunity to inform the members of the committee that there will be a press conference. Well, there was going to be a press conference at 10:30. It will be delayed because the chair was not able to table the report, so the press conference will take place later on. So in our next meeting, we will continue with our study on the financing, federal funding for minority language post-secondary institutions. So I am asking the committee, is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? Thank you.